So, when I first started practicing Buddhism, I was very taken by this idea that we could transcend the suffering here. And along with that, I was very naive too. But it was a very strong motivator to practice at first. But what I did was mix up the result with the practice. Mm. So I was focusing on the end of suffering, and I would criticize myself or others when problems arose. So it was this idea about, it was a quick path and we'll just do this and here we go. And that's the naive part. Mm. And it wasn't really a very conscious process. I really wasn't aware that I was doing that so much, but boy, it sure created a lot of misery and really slowed down my progress. I didn't understand the depth of my ignorance, of course, nor the repetition transformation demands. But when I did start recognizing this, I started relating to problems and obstacles a bit differently. So I stopped trying to make my life problem-free. I recognized that resisting change, not accepting the ever-changing flux, is what was making me miserable. I was resisting change that I then labeled as a problem. And I saw how I was creating my misery by pushing problems away to get rid of them or pulling into my life what I thought would bring happiness. And happiness does not reside in a problem-free life. That's not what goes on. So when we do this, pushing away problems and attaching to what we think we need for happiness, we're dividing the world into opposites: good, bad, right, wrong, positive, negative. And this dualistic view does not accord with reality. In this samsaric life, things are impermanent, changing moment to moment. When we stop trying to make our lives problem-free and accept the very nature of our existence is change, then we can begin to experience some inner freedom. And again, it's not freedom from distress or anxiety or problems. It is freedom that can be experienced within distress, anxiety, problems. When we just watch the mind without trying to control it, we're able to see nothing lasts. Everything is emotion, perceptions, feelings, sensations. And once we understand and remember that everything is fleeting, the tension then between expectations and actual reality starts to dissolve. I begin to understand that the misery of the moment will pass as I stay with this awareness. It's my preoccupation with what I have named a problem that makes the situation static and brings the misery. The mind that creates conceptual thoughts all day creates misery. My mind creates conceptual thoughts all day long. Yeah. And so to misperceive reality is to suffer, just as the Buddha taught. Our habitual tendency to grasp arises when we misperceive the constant flow of our body and mind and mistake it for a solid, unchanging self. And we've all heard and we know intellectually that this solid, unchanging self has never existed. But it's, at least for me, it's just intellectual, and so it falls out of my brain a lot. But when we can connect to our awareness without the conceptual thought factory churning out stories, then we can start accommodating whatever arises, all these changes that are happening all the time. And so in a sense, we kind of become bigger than the thought, the emotions, remembering that everything is always in flux. Then we kind of have space now for the movement that is that flux. And so maybe another way to say that is that we become flexible to what is arising in the moment. Mistaking our habitual misperceptions for the whole of reality is what ignorance is. And so starting to recognize impermanence then starts correcting these misperceptions that are so habitual. And this is not a quick or easy practice, because when I experience change, I often try to hold things in place, make them static. And so my conceptual story is banging into the reality of change. That's where the misery happens. That's why for me, this whole idea about just drop it is so helpful, because the tighter I hold on, the more miserable I become. Recognize the fluidity of all things, especially ourselves, expands our self of who we are and what we can actually do. That's that big, vast mind that we can step into sometimes. But the first step is accepting what is actually happening moment by moment. So one of the ways that I try to cultivate and work with this is to recognize and deconstruct my expectations as they arise, and recognize when expectations are running. Oftentimes I'll feel that energy in my body. I'm anticipating something, looking forward to something, dreading something. And so to try and deconstruct that and just try to be open to what is coming, because I don't have any control over what is coming. And I don't like that, but that's what it is. Trying to meet each transition time in the day with an open curiosity is what I've been trying to work with a little bit. Well, this is really a foreign way to relate to life. And so I find myself holding and feeling afflictions arise because of me holding on to things, try to make them static. And so I have to start again and again throughout the day. So I feel the misery. I try to bring some compassion, recognize that I'm holding on tight and trying to make things static, or I'm running with the conceptual reality in my mind instead of what is actually in front of me. And so trying to remember that, then I get some space. And it frees space up a little bit so that I can be more in alignment with what actually is arising moment to moment. And so today let's try and align ourselves with the reality of this samsaric existence we're in. Everything changes moment to moment. Try not to get stuck in our self-created conceptions, and to do that with a lot of compassion and acceptance. And if we do that, then there's going to be some space and some room so that we can turn our attention to others and develop our bodhicitta.